Good afternoon and welcome everybody.
Sorry now, sorry.
Oh,
Could you sit down?
okay, sit down. I'm delighted to welcome Joe Armstrong, who has kindly driven down from Dublin this morning to be with us
From
today.
Kells.
From Kells,
Kells
sorry,
County
Kells.
Meath, in the
Yes.
wilds of North County Meath.
Yes. So he's got so many credits to his name. I'm just going to read from his book about him. He spent 9 years studying for the Roman Catholic priesthood with the Marist Fathers in Dublin in the 80s. He taught English and religious education in London for 5 years. He's a writer, podcaster and humanist celebrant. His RT Radio 1 documentary, From Belief to Unbelief, was shortlisted for New York Festival's World's Best Radio Awards. A multi-award-winning public speaker. Aren't we lucky to have him? He is author of several books and was a weekly columnist with the Irish Times for 7 years. He's married with 2 adult children and he lives in Kells in Ireland.
Kells County Meath.
So the theme for today we're going to talk about is losing religion and finding myself. And we're going to start with extracts maybe from your first book.
Why not?
But before you start, I just want to say that I was really struck by your raw honesty and openness in writing this and sharing in your book. It's about your faith, your doubt, your sexuality, your struggle with celibacy. And so when I had read this book, I was just saying to Joe over lunch earlier, it's like when you're watching a series on Netflix or something and you want to see the next episode as quickly as possible. So I can't wait actually to read the second book after reading the first book. So where should we start?
Well, I think we should start by reading from the first book.
Okay.
So I asked Gill, pardon me, Gill sent me an email just before, and so Gill is in my mind. I asked Gill to choose passages that she'd like me to read, and she did. And so the first one, which you suggested, this was a letter that I wrote. I kept journals all of my life, right? Which is why I was able to write my memoirs, because your memory is a very unreliable source. But because I'd written contemporaneous journals right through my life, I had it all there, how I was thinking, how I was feeling. And I had letters, I always kept letters. So this was a letter that I sent my Uncle John, and my Uncle John was a priest, a Catholic priest. And I sent this letter to him in 1979, when I was all of 17 years old. 17, not 70, 17.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly embarrassing. And when I was, Gill referred to the RT documentary, and when the production supervisor saw this letter, she said, "Oh, we have to use that." And I said, "No, we can't, it's too embarrassing." But that's all right. Hello, you're welcome. So it's very embarrassing, but it shows, and this is sort of my intention in writing the book, was just to show how I was thinking. Dear Uncle John, 17-year-old Joseph, right? Dear Uncle John, I would like this to be the first letter you receive from Ireland, because he lived in South Africa, after the postal strike. Anybody here old enough to remember the postal strike in 1979?
Yeah.
Went on for months. The first thing I want to tell you, and it's the only thing that's really important, is that I joined the charismatic prayer meeting. A charismatic prayer meeting. And really, Uncle John, it's great. Christ's love is flowing more and more in Ireland through the charismatic renewal. Pockets of Christians are opening up all over the city. Only last night, we heard news of a new prayer meeting in Sean McDermott Street. You can hear I'm a dope, I'm from Dublin, right? I can't see it now. Yeah, Sean McDermott Street. Only weeks ago, another in the Mater Hospital. This, along with the many little known parish prayer meetings like Edenmore and Dunny-Carney. I'm from Dunny-Carney, north side of Dublin. And the bigger ones like the Airport and Eustace Street. Only in the last few months have we seen the increased numbers of dove badges. If you're in the charismatic renewal at that time, you went around a little dove for the Holy Spirit.
That's right. Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I do. I do.
Did you have one?
I know.
You were lucky. Now I've lost where it was. Oh yeah, dove badges, which are seen worn by all sorts of people. Mass, that was boring and dead, is now joyful and alive. The risen Christ is seen so often. Well, Jesus, I don't know where I saw him, but that's what I wrote. 4 weeks ago, I joined our parish meeting, and I've been going for months to the one in our school. We have one charismatic priest in our parish, but only last night another priest turned up from our parish. I pray that he will get over his initial discomfort. Please, Uncle John, pray for him too. And for all others that are starting to know not about Christ, but to actually know him. God, this is great. Please, if you have a minute, pray for me too. At present in our parish, we are about 100. In Dundalk, it started at 50. Now it's 1,000. God, I was so excited, wasn't I? Last weekend, there was a major gathering at Knock. Not too far from here, really, is it? Many witnessed to healing. One who was so far gone physically, far gone. Is that a diagnosable condition? He was so far gone physically, had returned an invalid to Ireland to die, and he witnessed to healing. Another was cured of multiple sclerosis. I'd like to see the evidence, but there you go. Our own charismatic priest tells of a man cured of a 20-year-old ankle disorder. I'd say he went to the physio, but anyway. And mental healing spreads like fire. To those of us within the renewal, it's back to the excitement lost and forgotten for centuries. The excitement of the realization of the risen Christ. Whatever happened to the church between then and now? You know, it feels like we're just continuing another chapter of the Acts of the Apostles, as if there's been no time lapse at all. The fruits of the Spirit are flowing. God is alive. Jesus is Lord.
Yeah.
Isn't it wonderful? Somebody walked in here now today. They think this is a prayer meeting. Instead of a humans gathering, non-believers. Jesus is Lord. Isn't it wonderful? Oh, sure, I always knew with my head. How did I always know with my head? That Jesus was God. How did you always know that, Joe? But anyway, that's for it. But now it's with my heart. I hope I'm not being hypocritical. The enthusiasm, the excitement seems, wait for it, false. Bloody did. It's so long been absent. Let's praise God. Night and day. You walked in here now to be saying, Jesus, they're very religious in there. God bless you. Praise God and right soon. I wrote that when I was 17.
Oh, right.
That was me.
So that demonstrated your religious fervour at the time.
It did.
And could you tell us what Uncle John meant to you? Why were you writing that letter to him?
Okay, he was a brother of my father, and he was physically huge, and he meant a lot to me. I just, you click with somebody. So I was very fond of him, and he was very fond of me. He had spent I spent 9 years in a seminary. He spent 11 years in a sanatorium because he had TB. And the story of his faith made a huge impact on my life. Because at that time, with TB, once you got it, that was it. There was no cure. So he was basically left in hospital for 11 years. I think he got out once during all of that time. But despite that, he constantly prayed, because he was a religious man. This is Ireland he was born, I think, in probably around about 1919 or even earlier. So, very Catholic Ireland.
Mm.
And his constant prayer was, Lord, make me your priest.
Mm.
And he's lying there in a bed with TB and he's not going anywhere. He's never going to be a priest. But anyway, then science came along and they came up with medical solutions to TB. So he had an operation which he had a lung removed and most of the other lungs. So for the rest of his life, he had very little. He was hardly able to breathe. And my memory of him was when he'd come to us to visit us, he'd stand at the door at night time and he'd be standing at the door and he'd go, oh, I can't. But he'd stand at the door and he'd go, and be taking these huge big breaths in, just trying to recharge his lungs,
Yeah.
So his story seemed to me to be proof of faith of God, because he got better. His prayer was, Lord, make me your priest.
Mm-hmm.
And then he had this operation and it didn't cure him, but it meant he could leave the sanatorium. And he wrote this letter to Archbishop McCann in South Africa, I want to become a priest. And Archbishop McCann in South Africa wrote back and he said, report to the Beta College in Rome, which he did. So he got out of the sanatorium, headed to Rome, studied for the priesthood, and my parents became engaged at his ordination.
Oh.
So that's Uncle John.
Yes. So what attracted you to train as a priest, and in particular to go into did you say Marist or Marist?
Marist, yeah.
Seminary.
They're called Marist because they're a French order, and it was, the Jesuits were the Society of Jesus, and the Marists were the Society of Mary. So in French, Marie is Marie. So they pair Marie, and la Société de Marie. So Marist. And so I like in my mid to late teens, the only thing I wanted to be was to be a priest. I had no interest in doing anything else. I did a pretty good intercert, and then I literally sabotaged my leaving cert so that I wouldn't be, quote unquote, tempted not to be a priest. So I kind of manipulated my own life to make sure I would become a priest. Crazy thinking. It just seemed to me to be the most important thing. Like, what's the meaning of life? Why are we here? Those kind of questions were what interested me. I was never interested in money. Still am really. But it's nice to, have a roof over your shoulder, and whatever. But I'm not motivated by money. And prestige, fame, none of those things interest me. I could never figure out why people would spend their Sunday afternoon playing golf. I thought, why would you want to be doing that? Do you know?
Yeah.
But priesthood, it's like, and the idea, as a kid, I watched people queuing. When I was a kid, you'd have everybody went to confession. Like, everybody went to confession.
Mm-hmm.
And on a Saturday night, the night before Sunday Mass, there'd be queues of people. You go down to confession.
I know.
Yeah. And, I was in Dooneycarney Parish, which is a huge church. And Mass, there'd be 7 or 8 Masses on a Sunday. Packed. Absolutely packed. The same churches now are as long as nobody in them. So, at that time, like, I thought, well, the priest is in the confessional, all these people are coming to him, and he seems to know it all, and he seems to have a wise word for them all, or a comforting word for them all, or he can forgive them his sins. It just seemed to me, why wouldn't you want to be a priest? Plus, then I went to the charismatic renewal. So all of my background was, my mother was very religious, crazily religious. Although after that letter, you're thinking I was crazily religious too. So I had 2 cousins who were studying for the priesthood. It was just a huge influence, and it was Ireland. I was born in 1962, so it was a big thing in Ireland to be a priest. Priest, doctor, teacher, that was sort of it. And I said, I'll go for the best of them all, I'll be a priest. And then Marists, I had heard that the Mars Seminary that there was a lot of stuff happening there. So that kind of
What kind
excitement.
of stuff?
Well, there were loads of students studying for the priesthood. So some of the seminaries were pretty dry and, and some of them didn't have that many seminarians. But it just sounded like that was a happening kind of place because there were loads of people. And they seemed to be clued into the charismatic renewal, which I thought was the future for the church. So it seemed exciting. And I felt that's the place to go. And then this priest called Larry Duffy had a huge influence on my life. He was a charismatic priest, and I kind of thought he was just like somebody who walked straight out of the Bible. He was so impressive, and I thought, so he's just like Jeremiah, God is talking directly to Larry Duffy.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. We used to call him the laser beam. He was a brilliant preacher, and so I'm not going to read it out now because it's going to take forever, but the passage I might have read out. At the end of it, he's telling me, he's praying over me because I've told him I want to be a priest, and he's praying over me and he's saying, many souls will be saved by your ministry. And this is like, in my mind, the guy who was a direct line to God telling me that many souls will be saved by my ministry. Away I go.
So we'll come to that passage in a minute, but you write very early on in your time in Milltown, you write about your need for intimacy and your struggle with celibacy and your doubts. But it seems that from a very early time you were considering about whether to carry on or to leave. But each time you decided to leave, you got persuaded to stay.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I mean, that became, so the intimacy thing, so the Marists, all Catholic priests aren't married. So there's secular priests and then there's religious priests. But if you're a member of a religious order, you also have a vow of celibacy. You don't just promise to your bishop that you won't get married.
Yeah.
You have a vow of celibacy. And I was kind of in the Marists when I got a shock. Because at the time, people were talking that maybe in the future, maybe in the near future, married priests would be allowed. So that sounded pretty cool to me. And I remember sitting at this lecture one day and the priest was talking to us about celibacy within the Marists. And he said, even if tomorrow the Pope said the priests could get married, we couldn't get married because we have a vow of celibacy. And I'm kind of going, what? You've never told me that before I joined the Marists. I was horrified, because I thought celibacy was like a necessary, as I understood it, part of the package. You couldn't be a priest without being celibate, but maybe in the near future we could get married, and so that was a shocker. And by then I was already I was a novice, or I was first professed or something like that.
So would you like to read that next passage?
Okay, so the second area, do you mean the one about when I decided to leave?
It's on 60.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So that's, yes,
Yeah.
okay. So 5 years in, I've struggled with this, and it's so hard to choose to leave, but I struggled, and eventually I decided, right, that's it, I'm going. So, it took 5 years. Slow learner, penny takes a long time to drop, right? So 5 years in, so this is kind of a key thing. So I'm going to read this one. I'll stop talking, I'll just read. So this is episode 60. My decision when it came on the 15th of December 1985, so now 23, in the middle of the night, a sleepless night, was definitive. As a boy of 23, I deemed it the loneliest decision of my life. After months of heightened anguish and discussions with the superior, my spiritual director, confessor, confreres, and friends at UCD, attuned to myself, I weighed the evidence and I made my solitary choice, surging up from my gut. I tried to imagine God loving me into being in my mother's womb, loving me for who I am, not for what I did. I had learned that true love is one's presence with another person rather than doing things for them. I needed to appreciate myself for who I was, not for what I did. As love can't be won, why was I in a seminary? If life wasn't about helping the needy, if those who did that might be motivated out of their selfish need to be needed, it changed everything. And there were no brownie points for sacrifice. The paradigm I'd grown up with of self-sacrificial love needed radical revision. I couldn't think of anyone who was a priest or religious for other than delusional or selfish motives. I'd seen enough of religious life to opine in my journal, scratch beneath the thin veneer of community life, and you will find the alienation of each individual within it. This is clearly 5 years on. I wouldn't have written that before I joined. At college, I warmed to Verena, girl at UCD, anytime I was near her. I wanted to kiss her when she touched me, hugged me, or came up close to me. Whenever we parted after a few minutes together, loneliness pained me. It was around this time that my history lecturer, Dr. Michael Richter at UCD, urged me to take my chance in the world. Take my chance in the world. Here was a caring, intelligent, authoritative adult suggesting an altogether different, responsible choice than the one presented to me in the seminary as the best one. Commit to yourself, he said to me. It is you who is important. Make yourself your priority. The first time I ever heard an adult say that to me. I dreamt of leaving the Marists. When I woke up, I could see myself going. Next night, I had another dream in which I journaled, I'm running down a lane heading home. I mused, quote from the journal, God is not a vindictive God. He won't insist that I become a priest to be happy. He won't make me miserable outside if I choose to leave. It's an idea put into my head as a child. Later that day, there was a festive Christmas atmosphere in Grafton Street. Sipping coffee, I waited for my mother and sister in the packed Paris Court Townhouse Centre. A pianist began to play and the music soothed me, lifting my mood. Then the full-voiced choir of the Glasnevin Musical Society blasted out Joy to the World, Joy to the World, da, 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 da. And my angst had dissipated by the time my mother and sister arrived. I even managed to tolerate my mother's obsessive talking. I asked her to inquire about getting a grant from Guinness's, because my dad worked in Guinness's, or had worked in Guinness's before he died, for a master's degree. If she interpreted this request as she might, she didn't show it. During reconciliation service that night, I went to confession out of habit. I didn't feel contrite for my sins, quote unquote, and I couldn't have cared less if I hadn't received absolution. The sacrament had become an empty ritual. I sat in the chapel and I imagined telling my confreres I owed it to them. Then I thought I might write something in their honour. Maybe this is it. I loved the place. It had been my home. I loved these men, well, most of them. I wondered how I would go. Would I be driven home in a house car, or would my sister collect me? I no longer needed to be a priest. I had to realise that I was loved and lovable. It was a breakthrough. I journaled, I don't have to be here to be happy. It's a choice, not a necessity. That night I couldn't sleep. My mother was inquiring about a grant for a master's degree. My university fees were paid. I had a medical card. Hopefully the Marists would give me some money. I needed to get down to study. My life's future shape would depend on it. The tears came like a river, bucketing, just getting emotional reading this, bucketing down my face, unknotting my stomach. As I passed through that threshold, knowing I had to leave, I could do no other. Still the tears came. I was heaving now, terrified and relieved at the death of my dream for the priesthood and stepping into the unknown. I had decided. and I needed to tell someone. As my director, Father Dennis Green, was away, I knocked on the superior's door in the middle of the night, but his bedroom was on the far side of his office. He was asleep and he could not hear me. So that's a huge moment, obviously, in my life and in the book. Question to the audience: 5 years in, did I leave? No. So despite that profound moment of personal realization that I had to leave, I didn't. Because about 2 weeks later, on the 30th of December, a good friend who had joined and left a convent called to see me. We had what I regarded in my journal as a most significant conversation about vocation, happiness, God's will, self-will, and my proposed leaving. I told her I was not a very good marist. And if you read the book, you know why. Given I had imagined at times that she and I could have a future together, I was surprised that she said that to leave involved less courage than to stay. I also met another girl I knew. She suggested I wasn't missing out on all that much by being in the Marists. None of the girls in her rented accommodation was going with anybody. It's yourself that counts, she said. A relationship is only possible when you are at peace with yourself. On New Year's Eve, this is 2 weeks after I decided to leave, I journaled. To stay involves daily effort, suffering, sin, dissatisfaction, crises, some difficult relationships in community, daily toil. To leave implies a supposed freedom, which is not so, material and sexual gratification which fails to satisfy, intellectual freewheeling. You lot are intellectual freewheelers. Which is untrue, and irresolute will. We are only given one vocation in life. A gap exists between my will and what I must admit I deep down believe to be God's will for me. Cringe. One answer is to cease to believe in my vocation. The other is to work humbly with my questions, doubts, disbeliefs, sins, trying to conform my will to God's. My life is at breakdown. I must reconstruct it. A benefit of the crisis I journaled was I am now learning to reveal my needs to others. My week at home was a disaster. Things were never worse with my mother. She was a difficult woman. I journaled on the 3rd of January. Escaping early to Milltown, I found Tony Ward, who was a priest. He had handwritten Robert Frost's poem, The Road Not Taken, for me. So, encouraging me to take the road less travelled by. My Uncle Jack, a stranger to subtlety and a devout Catholic, had posted me John Greenleaf Whittier's poem, Don't Quit. But I knew that on that crucial night in mid-December I journaled, I simply did not believe in my vocation. I hadn't got one. That was the whole self-realisation. The temptation to just slip back into daily living is very present, but at what cost? My confessor, the guy you make confession to, joined the fray. He said, "It's a wrong decision to leave. I believe you have a vocation. And the very least you should do is to put it out of your head until you've finished your BA this summer." By the 7th of January, I deemed my self-realisation of mid-December a mistake. And what I haven't read out, because it sort of happened between the two extracts, is my spiritual director, whom I loved, Dennis Green, a lovely guy, absolutely loved him. But he totally, what's the word? I know somebody who's read this has said that he betrayed me. I don't know if I would use that word, but when I told him that night, or whenever he came back from wherever he was, that I had decided to leave, at first he said, "Well, look, you've wrestled with this for long and hard, and you know, I respect your decision. And I'm thinking, Jesus, this is much easier than I thought it was going to be. And then he went off and he talked to the superior, and he was gone a long time. And when he came back, he had totally changed his tune. And it was, oh, wait another month, and you know, this is the Society of Mary, the Maris Fathers. They're a work of God. You can't just be
Go on another retreat.
Yeah, all that. And I remember thinking at the time, how can you say that? You've clearly got that from the superior, because his authentic reaction was totally different. And then he comes back and then he right up to Christmas, he was the Society of Mary is a work of God, and I was just getting all of this stuff on me, and I wasn't strong enough 5 years in, age 23, to resist it. So, you know, the girl who'd been in the convent and all of that. And I changed my mind. I couldn't believe it. I changed my mind. And I wasn't, but when I finally left, which was after 9 years, the nice thing is that I was then strong enough to resist all of that stuff. So I didn't care by then if the Pope himself had come in and knelt down in front of me and said, Joe, don't go, I would have said, get a life, I'm going.
So how do you think you went from having such a strong vocation to, first of all, deciding not to become a priest, and then coming to not believe in God even?
Big jump.
It's a big jump. The kernel of it was the experience of In My Gut, which is where I got the title. Do you want me to read that out?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is kind of the climax of the book. So 9 years, so 4 years after I decided to leave and been persuaded to stay, obviously the wrong decision. So I've been called a diaconate. So you're made a deacon before you're made a priest, and I've been called a diaconate. I got a date for the diaconate and all that kind of stuff. And I've got the collywobbles, and I'm thinking there's something wrong. I don't feel comfortable about this, all of that kind of stuff. So eventually I say, look, I want to do counselling. So I ask, can I see a counsellor? So this is somebody outside of the Marists, and it was a woman. So usually I'm, you know, a priest being directed by a priest, but this is a woman. She's not a Marist. She's not invested in me becoming a priest or a Marist priest. And so I went to her, and she was brilliant. I had so many insights. 20 sessions I had with her. Anyway, so that's just the context. So I'm seeing this and to this day I don't know her name. So in the book I call her Ms. D, because I think her name began with a D, but I don't know what her name was. Crazy, but there we go. I went out with my sister. This is 1989, 9 years in. And this is April of 1989, and I would leave in June. I went out with my sister for a drink on the night of Friday the 28th of April 1989, happy to have acted on my decision not to attend the weekend for senior Marist students. We met a friend of mine from UCD, a lovely, fine-looking fellow. He joined us upon my invitation. After drinks, we went to a nightclub. Linda, a friend of my sister, said to me, don't be a priest, be a waste. And next day I journaled, was in fine form. This day just ended. I studied and felt good about myself, appreciating that we become ourselves by acting on our decisions. The following day I skipped Sunday Mass. Yee-hoo! Do you know what? I was 27. First time in my life I was skipping Mass. Do you know? And when you're studying with priesthood, it's a huge thing to skip Sunday Mass. My second time to do so. I went for a cycle instead and enjoyed it. There you go. After a luxurious hot bath, I went with my friends Tom and Brendan to a Maura O'Connell concert at the Olympia. She was magnificent. Remember Maura O'Connell? Is she still around? She's brilliant. I loved her. The audience singing along with gusto. Here was life being lived to the full. a vibrant alternative universe to my preoccupation with religious concepts and sacrifice. On the 1st of May, I absented myself from Mass and morning prayer. I was getting really bad. I was depressed though and did little study. I rang home to talk to my sister, but my mother answered. She spoke about a guy who pulled out just before diaconate, as if oblivious to my situation. My journal records my reaction as rage, but doesn't record if I let it show. At Spiritual Direction on the 2nd of May, I discussed avoiding Mass, my critical view of papal teachings, and my rejection of Catholic dogmas like the Immaculate Conception of Mary, a theological contrivance so that Jesus, supposedly divine, could be born of a woman unstained by original sin. I also found fundamental doubts about the sacramental and clerical systems of the Church. I also had fundamental doubts. She wondered if next time I might be closer to a decision. I journaled, opting for what's safe isn't working so well. I feel I'm turned inside out. Now, when I wrote that down, I feel I'm turned inside out, I thought that was a really painful thing, if you're turned inside out. At first, the image spoke of my inner anguish and pain, but then I saw it as a powerful metaphor for my nascent self, my emerging self. Emerging from within, I was growing in personal integrity, becoming my authentic self, more comfortable in my skin. Next day, the 3rd of May, I had another liberating image of walking through glass unscathed, a breakthrough and a breakout. I felt it physically through my body, releasing tension from my gut. My self-imposed religious restrictions fell away, yielding shard by shard. I stepped through, crossing the boundary of my self-confinement, discovering the glass was a mirage. That sensation encapsulated my liberation, shattering the man-made boundaries of religion and of my mind. I was crossing a threshold, discarding a mask and a shell, stepping into personal freedom. I went to the careers office in UCD and explored becoming a writer, journalism, editing and publishing. I couldn't sleep that night due to existential questions cascading through my mind. All options remained open, doing the All Hallows course next year, choosing leave of absence, retaining my identity as a Marist, financial security should I need it, and the option of returning to the Marists, doing the higher diploma in education so I would be trained to teach as a security for me and not a waste of time should I stay in the Marists, looking for a job in publishing in Ireland or London, or temporary employment with an eye to journalism. During counselling with Ms. D, but for my journal it's not clear to me which session it was, it might have happened earlier or later in my process, she pushed me to decide the fundamental choice that faced me. Do you believe you have a vocation? She asked. I could still read both interpretations of my life. I don't know, I said. Get out of your head. What does your gut say? She asked. My gut. After all these years, was I to wager my life on my gut? Discarding other people's opinions, and the priest who told me I have a vocation. Just lost my page. And ignoring my previous decisions to stay and any theological argument, decide solely on my gut. She asked, in this moment, right now, in this moment, what does your gut say? The consequences for me couldn't have been starker. My vocation, identity, work, financial security, my past, present and unknown future, all to be determined by my gut. I became aware of my belly and my vital organs churning within. I don't know, I cried in despair. I know it's hard, but try. What does your gut say? I don't know. Right now, she persisted. The clock ticked, and out of the silence I answered, no. I whispered from my gut. To be clear, what are you saying? In my gut, I don't believe. And it was the moment that changed my life. My Berlin Wall between head and gut was breached. And I know you're a woman who believes deeply in the gut.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because some of you may know that my work as a biodynamic therapist, we understand the importance of the gut and the gut-brain axis, and the fact that the messages come, it's a two-way channel, so you can get messages from the gut to the brain as well as from the brain to the gut. And in fact, if you realise that I think it's 90% of the serotonin in your body is produced in the gut, the lining of the gut.
And what does the serotonin do?
It's a feel-good factor. It's a feel-good factor. Where it's such a wonderful description of this barrier between the gut and the brain breaking down, and you came to really understand and know from yourself. So it's wonderful.
And I remember that moment so clearly. And it was so scary. Because intellectually, the problem was I could see both sides. You know, I can see, there are really brainy people out there who remain priests because they see a theological, rational, in their view, reasoning which makes sense to them. And I could see that. But I could also see the atheistic, non-believer part of me, which I would now kind of think of as my adult self. That doesn't need to believe in an imaginary friend and an afterlife which doesn't exist, other than the fact that my cells, my body will become something else when I die. That battle was always going on for 9 years.
It reminds me of The Hound of Heaven by Francis Thompson. Have you heard it? Yeah, I'm sure you've
heard the title.
I fled him down the nights and down the days, I fled him down the arches of the years. It reminds me of that, the feeling, the pull to do and not wanting to go. You know, that feeling of fighting. I went through it myself when I was in the convent, of course, naturally. The priest would come to give you retreats, and I would tell you think about it. And naturally you would think, am I being called? And this is why I was sent to college, Loretto, to be known. And I remember fighting with that, saying, I don't really want to be a nun, but maybe I should be.
How long were you in for?
Pardon?
How long were you a nun?
I was never a nun.
But you were in the convent?
I was at school.
Oh, at school. Oh, sorry. Okay.
I was a boarder in the school. So this is why when the priests would come to give retreats and that, they would ask you to think about it. And we did. But I rejected it.
But it's such a difference between people can be tormented with this recycling of trying to work things out all in the head, whereas when you trust the wisdom of the body, you get the clear message. You know?
Yeah.
But it's like I know I'm repeating myself a bit, but it was just so scary for me to make that choice. Am I seriously going to, resolve this being on the fence for 9 years? Am I going to jump on the basis of my gut? It was so scary. It was utterly scary, because all of those things, my identity and all those things, were all at stake. That was so risky. Why would you do that? And in your gut, right now, not tomorrow. And it was a breakthrough, and it was my Berlin Wall. And of course, Berlin Wall did come down in 1979. It was the same year,
But that's what you said about being indoctrinated when you were a child. We were all, I don't know about Gill, but we were indoctrinated as children from the age of 4 up. And it was around us everywhere we could. It wasn't long afterwards. I must be nearly 40 before it dawned on me, there can't be a God, there can't be an afterlife. And and I'm wondering why that indoctrination is still going on in schools today. And that's my one big part that I'm saying about that. I taught for 17 years, you know, I taught infants. I indoctrinated children. Mea culpa, mea culpa, mea culpa.
And that's a huge concern for me too, you know, because like when you've been indoctrinated and then you realise it's all bull, and I believed it, and look what, like, my 20s.
Yeah.
Now, okay, you know, it's not a waste of time. I was asking good questions and I've come up with answers. And, you know, it's not a waste of time, but it's still, it's happening again today. Kids being initiated to believe in baloney.
Yeah.
And happily, a lot of them won't take it seriously, but some of them will. And they'll make life choices based on it. And like, I know nuns, priests, pastors who have spent their entire lives devoted to this imaginary God that doesn't exist. And then they get to a point in their life where they're too old, or they feel they're too old to chuck it in. Because what can they do now? Like, who'd have me now?
Yeah, you were telling me, you know, it took you 9 years when you were telling me about somebody, you know, who it took 29 years before he left.
Yeah, and there are people who take even more, you know. Yeah. No, my good friend, a very good friend of mine, he was my best man at my wedding, and he took a little longer than me, but he's a great guy.
So, when you decided to use your journal entries to write a book, did you already know when you started that there might be 2 volumes or even more possibly?